Today, we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first story is about a couple torn apart by a devastating divorce, but despite the animosity, they decide to go caving together, where they end up getting trapped for days. However, the story soon takes a dark and dramatic turn. The second one is a tragedy that defies reason. Two adventurers, knowing full well how limited their chances of survival were, still chose to press forward into a deadly, unforgiving exploration. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Sherry DeCrow and John Hubbard had been through a lot during their divorce. Screaming matches, bitter arguments, and enough resentment to last a lifetime. Their families had witnessed the ugly breakup between the 49-year-old woman and 54-year-old man, wondering if they'd ever be civil to each other again. But that Sunday afternoon on August 24th, 2003, something shifted. Maybe it was nostalgia for better times, or maybe they both just needed to prove they could still be around each other without everything exploding. Whatever the reason, they found themselves driving toward Hubbard Cave in Glenwood Canyon, just like they used to do when they were happy. They didn't tell anyone where they were going. Not Sherry's daughter, not John's friends, not a single soul. It was an impulse decision, the kind that seemed harmless at the time. The cave entrance yawned before them, like a mouth in the mountainside. They'd been here before, back when they trusted each other, back when they worked as a team. Now they stood at the threshold as strangers who happened to share a history. What was supposed to be a quick look became something more. The cave called to them, promising escape from the messy reality of their failed marriage. They clicked on their flashlights and stepped into the darkness. The first passage was narrow, forcing them to squeeze through sideways. Then they crawled through spaces barely wide enough for their shoulders. The cave system twisted and turned like a three-dimensional puzzle. Left, right, up, down. Every direction looked the same. They moved deeper, following passages that branched off into more passages, each one leading them further from the surface world. Then it happened. They reached a junction where three tunnels met, and neither of them recognized it. The cave had become a maze, and they were lost in its heart. John's flashlight beam swept across identical rock formations. Nothing looked familiar. They backtracked, tried different routes, but every path led to more confusion. The cave had swallowed them whole. When the flashlights began to dim, panic set in. They found a small alcove, barely large enough for both of them to squeeze into. The space was cramped, forcing them to sit pressed together like sardines in a can. John's light flickered once, twice, then died. Sherry's lasted a few more minutes before it too faded to nothing. Complete darkness consumed them. The silence was crushing. The temperature in the cave was dropping quickly, and they had nothing. No food, no water, no extra clothes. Just the hope that someone would notice they were missing. But who would notice? They'd told no one about their plans. Monday passed in a blur of cold and hunger. They took turns sleeping, pressed together for warmth, their bodies fighting off hypothermia. Meanwhile, above ground, life continued as normal. Sherry's daughter Ramaya went about her day, assuming her mother was somewhere doing something. John's friends figured he was dealing with post-divorce depression in his own way. It wasn't until Tuesday evening that the worry began. Ramaya tried calling her mother's house. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. A cold knot formed in her stomach. She called John's number, but that went straight to voicemail. The family gathered, sharing their growing anxiety. Where could they be? Some wondered if maybe the former couple had reconciled and gone away together. Others feared something darker. Everyone remembered the bitter divorce proceedings. John's anger during the separation had been frightening at times. His resentment when everything was finalized had worried people. The arguments had been loud and vicious. By Tuesday evening, the fear had become unbearable. Ramaya called the Garfield County Sheriff's Office to report her mother and John missing. Sheriff Lou Valario began an investigation, but family members immediately shared their concerns about John's volatile behavior. They painted a picture of a man who'd been pushed too far, who might be capable of something terrible. The suggestion that John might be vengeful and violent changed everything. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was a potential crime. Back in the cave, John was struggling with more than just the cold and hunger. The divorce had left him gutted, and having Sherry so close while knowing he'd already lost her forever was eating him alive. The anger and depression mixed together in the darkness. He realized one of their flashlights still had some battery life left. The dim light flickered weakly, but it was something. John pulled out a few tools he'd been carrying, a hammer and chisel. He gripped them tightly and moved closer to Sherry, his face set in grim determination as he carefully made his next move. Wednesday brought helicopters. The Air National Guard flew over the area, searching for any sign of Sherry, John, or their vehicle. The search turned up nothing, adding to the growing sense that something terrible had happened. Family members weren't satisfied with the official search efforts. They were convinced that time was running out, that every hour could be the difference between life and death. Thursday morning, they took matters into their own hands. A family friend who was a pilot agreed to fly over the area, using Sherry's house as a starting point for the search. 30 minutes into the flight, he spotted it, their Suburban parked at the trailhead near Hubbard Cave. He immediately radioed the location to authorities. Deputies rushed to the scene, but what they found only confirmed their worst fears. Sherry had indeed been with her ex-husband, just as they had suspected. The discovery of the vehicle seemed to validate their theory about foul play. Instead of launching an immediate rescue operation, they secured the area and treated it as a crime scene. Yellow tape went up around the Suburban. The entire area was flagged off as deputies began looking for evidence of a struggle. A search dog led officers to the cave entrance, but they only shouted into the opening. No thorough search of the cave system was conducted. When family members and friends offered to enter the cave themselves, deputies refused, citing safety concerns. The assumption was clear. John had brought Sherry here to hurt her, maybe even kill her. The cave was just a convenient place to dispose of evidence. As thunderstorms moved into the area, officials suspended the search and sent everyone home. The decision infuriated family members who knew every hour counted, but deputies insisted they were following proper procedures. Friday morning brought the family back to the cave site, frustrated and desperate. After heated arguments with deputies, officials finally allowed family members to enter the cave and search for themselves. Ramaya DeCrow and her brother grabbed flashlights and headed into the cave system without hesitation. They called out for their mother and John, their voices echoing through the passages. They followed the map and went deep inside the 400 feet, 122 meters long cave. As they navigated deeper into the cave, they noticed fresh markings on the walls carved into the stone. The markings created a trail that led them directly to where Sherry and John waited. Within minutes, they found the pair weak but alive, huddled together in their cramped shelter. The reunion was emotional, relief, joy, and anger all mixed together. They'd spent 4.5 days in the darkness, but they'd survived. The rescue was almost anticlimactic after all the drama. Family members helped the pair navigate back through the narrow passages to the cave entrance, where medical personnel waited to examine them. Both were dehydrated and weak, but in remarkably good condition considering their ordeal. They'd spent more than 4 days without food or water in the freezing cold cave, yet they'd managed to keep each other alive. John and Sherry had no idea about the drama unfolding outside. They were focused on staying alive, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch in the absolute darkness. It was only then that the truth came to light. John had used his hammer and chisel to carve directional markers into the cave walls, marking areas where they'd been. He'd been thinking that if no one showed up and they were at the brink of death, he could somehow save Sherry by helping her navigate out. The man who'd been suspected of violence had actually been trying to save the woman he'd lost. Instead, it was rather Sherry who had intended only to show John the way to the cave, but then later they decided to explore. An explosive argument erupted between family members and deputies. The family accused the sheriff's department of hampering the search and delaying the rescue by treating the situation as a crime scene instead of a missing persons case. Despite their bitter divorce, the couple had shared a stronger bond inside the cave, keeping each other's spirits up during their darkest hours. The deputies had wasted precious time looking for evidence of a crime that never happened. Sherry and John declined further medical attention after their initial examination. They climbed into their Suburban and drove to a local hospital to recover in private, leaving behind a scene of recrimination and anger. Family members remained furious about the experience. Sheriff Lou Valario defended his department's actions, claiming they had followed proper procedures. But the criticism was harsh and public, but it also demonstrated something remarkable about human resilience. Two people who'd been at each other's throats during their divorce had worked together to survive an ordeal that could have killed them both. Their time in the cave had changed something fundamental between them. The shared experience of facing death together had stripped away the petty grievances and reminded them of their capacity for partnership. This next story is a baffling tragedy, a fatal outcome that raises questions about fate, choice, and the true cost of overconfidence. It was August 30th, 1986. The late summer evening air in Walton County, Florida, carried the familiar sounds of divers preparing their equipment near Morrison Spring. The natural spring, known for its underwater cave system, had drawn another group of diving enthusiasts for what should have been a routine training session. Morrison Spring's entrance opens into a cavern system that has lured countless divers over the years. But beneath its inviting surface lies a complex network of passages where the margin for error shrinks to nothing. At 7:15 that evening, several divers gathered at the spring's edge for a planned night dive training session. Among them were Mike Clennon, a 36-year-old diver with PADI rescue certification, but no cave training experience, and Brenda Buño, a 26-year-old woman who had just completed her open water certification that very day. The group had prepared according to standard procedures, each diver equipped with a single light and a Sialume stick attached to their gear. The Sialume stick served a dual purpose beyond providing backup illumination. Different colors distinguished students from instructors, creating a visual safety system in the darkening water. Night diving requires heightened awareness and preparation. The familiar underwater landscape transforms in darkness, with navigation becoming significantly more challenging. The training session proceeded without incident, with participants practicing the skills necessary for safe diving in low-light conditions. Mike, despite his rescue certification, was learning alongside the newer divers, while Brenda was experiencing her first night dive with her brand new certification. As the session concluded, most divers were satisfied with their evening's work and prepared to surface. However, 4 members of the group made a decision that would alter the course of the evening dramatically. Instead of ending their dive with a training session, they chose to venture into the lower cavern system of Morrison Spring. Among these 4 were Mike and Brenda, whose contrasting experience levels would prove irrelevant in the face of the cave's unforgiving nature. This decision marked the beginning of a series of critical errors. The 4 divers descended into the lower cavern without establishing a continuous guideline to the entrance, a fundamental safety protocol in cave diving. Each carried only a single light source and a single tank of compressed air, along with their Sialume sticks. Cave diving differs fundamentally from open water diving in its unforgiving nature. Unlike open water, where a diver can ascend directly to the surface in an emergency, cave systems present overhead obstacles that block direct ascent. Passages can be narrow, silty, and disorienting. Without proper training, equipment, and safety protocols, even experienced open water divers can quickly find themselves in life-threatening situations. The lower cavern at Morrison Spring extends deeper into the limestone formation, where natural light disappears entirely. The passages wind through rock formations that have remained unchanged for thousands of years, creating a maze that can confuse even experienced cave divers. In this environment, proper preparation and adherence to safety rules become matters of life and death. Within the lower cavern, the 4 divers explored the underwater passages as their air supplies gradually diminished. The confined space and exertion of swimming through the cave system caused their breathing rates to increase, consuming their limited air more rapidly than anticipated. Soon, 2 of the divers recognized the warning signs of low air pressure in their tanks and signaled to their companions. Mike and Brenda had signaled their intention to remain in the lower cavern for a while longer. This decision reflected a dangerous overconfidence in their abilities and a fundamental misunderstanding of the risks they faced. The other two divers began their ascent toward the surface, but the absence of a guideline immediately complicated their exit. In the darkness of the cave, with only their single lights and dim psialum sticks for illumination, finding the correct path to the entrance became a challenge. The familiar reference points visible during their descent were now obscured by the different perspective of their ascent route. For several anxious minutes, the two ascending divers searched for the way out. Their lights swept across the limestone walls and ceiling, looking for recognizable features that would guide them to safety. The psychological pressure of being lost in an underwater cave while air supplies dwindled would have been immense. Training and experience in cave diving teaches divers to remain calm in such situations. But without proper cave training, panic becomes a dangerous possibility. Eventually, the two divers located the exit route and surfaced safely at Morrison Spring. Their emergence from the water was at approximately 8:40 p.m., back inside the depths of Morrison Springs. Brenda and Mike continued their exploration. However, they didn't realize they were gambling their lives on the assumption that caves forgive the same mistakes as open water. Mike's rescue certification provided him with skills for assisting divers in distress in open water situations. But cave diving presents entirely different challenges that require specialized training. The techniques and procedures for cave diving emergencies differ significantly from those used in open water rescue situations. His certification, while valuable in other contexts, offered little protection in the unforgiving environment of an underwater cave. Brenda's situation was even more precarious. Having completed her open water certification that very day, she possessed only the most basic diving skills. The two divers had established an air management plan before their descent. Mike started with 1,200 psi of air pressure in his tank, while Brenda began with 1,700 psi. They agreed to turn back when their air supplies reached 500 psi, following the basic principle of maintaining adequate air reserves for their exit from the cave. However, air management in cave diving involves more complex calculations than simple turnaround pressures. Experienced cave divers use the rule of thirds, consuming 1/3 of their air supply on the way in, 1/3 on the way out, and reserving 1/3 for emergencies. This conservative approach accounts for the possibility of navigation errors, equipment failures, or assisting a distressed diving partner. As the minutes passed in the lower cavern, the two remaining divers consumed their air supplies while exploring the underwater passages. Unknown to them, their companions above were growing increasingly concerned about their extended absence. Other divers who had witnessed the evening's events recognized the potential danger of the situation. Immediately after the two survivors surfaced, additional divers entered the water to check on Mike and Brenda. The timing of this rescue attempt proved crucial. It had been only 5 to 10 minutes since the missing divers were last seen. The rescue divers descended into the lower cavern, their lights cutting through the darkness as they searched for signs of the missing pair. The underwater environment that had seemed inviting during the evening's training session now took on an ominous quality. Every shadow could conceal a tragedy. Every passage could lead to answers or deeper mystery. The discovery came swiftly but too late. Brenda was found against the ceiling of the lower cavern, her body motionless in the water. Mike lay on the floor of the same chamber, equally still. Both divers still wore their masks, but their regulators, the devices that delivered life-sustaining air from their tanks, had come free from their mouths. No lights were functioning, and the psialum sticks that had seemed adequate for backup illumination proved too dim to provide meaningful visibility in the cave's absolute darkness. The scene told a story of desperation and confusion. The darkness that had enveloped the cave was complete. Even the entrance could not be seen from their position. Without functioning lights and with inadequate backup illumination, the divers had found themselves in a situation where navigation became impossible and panic likely inevitable. The rescue operation shifted into emergency mode. Both divers were evacuated from the lower cavern and brought to the surface as quickly as possible. The transition from the silent underwater world to the chaos of an emergency rescue scene above water marked a frantic attempt to reverse the tragedy that had unfolded below. At the surface, CPR was immediately administered to both divers. The rescue techniques learned by many divers, including Mike himself, were now being applied in a desperate attempt to save lives. They were rushed to a nearby hospital. However, the damage caused by prolonged oxygen deprivation in the underwater environment had already occurred. Both Mike Clanan and Brenda Bugnot were pronounced dead after arrival at the hospital. The analysis of this tragedy reveals a devastating cascade of safety violations that transformed a routine diving outing into a fatal disaster. The violation of fundamental cave diving safety rules, the light rule requiring multiple independent light sources, the line rule mandating continuous guidelines to the entrance, the air rule governing proper gas management, and the training rule requiring appropriate certification for the environment, combined with poor judgment to create conditions where survival became impossible.